So after I finished the first session I had of modeling this area of our painting with the lavender flowers, then I actually had to take a little break for a few days. So what has happened now that I've come back to the painting is that all of these darker areas that we've been painting have become something called sunken in. And when the painting or the paint is sunken in, that means that it's become dry, which you can see it's completely dry now to the touch. And what happens then is that the paint kind of stops being wet and glowy and it becomes dry and matte. So all of these areas that are especially dark, which is a lot in our painting, has kind of lost the depth that the value had. So it's become a little bit brighter as it's dried. And this is completely normal, it happens, and especially if you work on a painting for a longer time, you will most definitely experience that some areas in the painting get sunken in. And what I would recommend if this happens is to do something called oiling out. So oiling out is basically when you use a type of medium, a gel or an oil to just get that glow back in the paint. So what I'm going to do today to fix this is that I'm going to oil out with something called bleached linseed oil. So this bleached linseed oil is great for oiling out because it's something that a lot of paint already is mixed with. So it's introducing a familiar friend, you might say, that we know works well with the paint and the pigment. So how you want to do this is you want to use a completely clean brush. It's very important that you don't have any pigment of paint in your brush, because if you do, then that could become wet when you start applying the linseed oil, and that can kind of mix itself in with your painting, which we don't want. So once you have your completely clean brush, I'm also going to be working with a very soft brush. And I'm going to be working very light. So this whole operation is just about applying very, very, very gently. Cannot express this enough. Very gently, very thinly, a little bit of linseed oil just to bring back that glow in the painting, so that when you start painting in and out of those darker and lighter areas, then you will be working with the true values of those areas. Because what can happen now if I don't oil out is that I can continue painting on it, and probably because I know my mixes and I've done this for a while, it would be okay. But if I'm kind of new to this and I don't really know and I have a hard time going back and forth in between the darker and lighter areas to model the form, then once everything is dry and you put the varnish on, then you're actually going to see everything that's been put down. And then you can see if you haven't been modeling in and out of the correct values, then you're going to have a lot of potential unpleasant surprises and a lot of not so nice transitions. So yeah, oiling out is just going to make it easier for you. And also I would say now that we're in this phase, it's more okay to oil out because now we're actually going to start with the finer modeling. So working with our true values is, I would say, more important now than ever. I am, however, not going to be oiling out everything because I don't need that. I'm just going to be oiling out the areas that I'm going to be working with, and I'm just going to be oiling out a little bit out into the background, because I'm not going to go from this point, for instance, all the way out here to do the modeling. I don't need to do that now. I just need to work with this area right here and then go like a little bit out to get my modeling and the turning of form happening in my painting. I'm taking the tiniest bit of linseed oil. I'm even just dabbing off a little bit of the linseed oil on a tissue paper just to, really just get the minimum of it. Today, I am going to continue working in this area. So I'm going to start by oiling out that area. And I'm only going to oil out like a tiny bit around the contour. And I'm applying this oil super, super, super gently. And as you can see, we have The oiling in has really left like a value jump in our background. Our background is a lot darker than what it appears to be, and this is important to know. I'm applying this super light with my brush. I'm not going to go over it many times because even though the painting is dry to the touch, if I start rubbing too much on my painting with the oil will have a thinning effect. So then it will actually start to come off, which we do not want. It's really important to also, I would say, to check when you put a little bit of this oil in, then go with your brush down on a piece of tissue paper and just see if any paint comes off on the tissue paper. And then you just basically know that your paint is wet in that area. So then you don't need to put any more oil on that area. In fact, you should probably stay off that area then. But because I let this dry for a couple of days, I've actually, so far that hasn't happened to me. I also used a little bit of medium when I was laying in this background, which is a medium that I'm really happy with. I'll show you guys. It's Go Green medium from Sennelier. And this medium is actually speeding up the drying time of the paint. So this one can be a good one to use if you don't want to wait a really long time, or if you're working with pigments that has a lot of oil in them that usually takes a bit longer to dry, like this black, for instance, that I was using for the background. I know that has a lot of oil in it, so to put a little bit of medium in this really speeds up the drying time. So yeah, another thing about this medium is that it's really great because it's non-toxic. You can bring it on planes, you can work with it inside. Like me, I'm working from home. I have a home studio. So for me, this really is ideal because working at home with toxic solvents is far from ideal, and I really think prioritizing health when you work with oil paint is quite important. So I just really have good things to say about this medium. It doesn't smell, doesn't harm your health. It's quite a good price also. I would say it's the same price as normal mediums, and it says on the tube that you shouldn't add more than 25% into your paint mix. So I usually just add, like the tiniest bit. But that just makes my paint a little bit more pliable, a little bit smoother, and it really speeds up the drying time. I'm just going to continue to apply this linseed oil like super gently. Now I have it all around my flowers, and I'm just going to give the lightest little brush of the linseed oil through my flowers as well, just because I know there's some sunken areas in there. And I think that is good for now. Now I can really see the true values. And this linseed oil is going to stay wet, I would say, at least until the end of the session. So I don't have to worry about, reapplying it and stuff like that. Even though I put it on very thinly, it still is going to stay wet for me to be able to work on this area. I would say ideally, truly ideally, you don't do this process more than once. Because if you start doing this every single time you come back to your painting, then you might create something called an oil slick, which is when you have lots of layers of linseed oil in your painting and that layer doesn't really get to dry, so it starts to react with the paint that is on your painting, and these little like sticky drops of linseed oil can appear, and they're quite hard to get away. They can be removed with a little bit of solvent, like if you have a little bit of turpentine, you can get into that whole restoration process, but that really is a nightmare, and having an oil slick really states that your painting process has been very unhealthy. What you want to do with oil paint is you really want to go from thinner layers to thicker layers, so that the layers in the bottom of your painting, like the first layers or the previous layer that you're putting down, really gets a chance to dry before you put the next layer on top. Because what happens then is that you're going to get a healthy painting that is way less prone to cracking or something happening with it over time. So I'm going to start working on this and see how far I come. And then if I start working on this lower part of the painting, then I'm going to do the same oiling out process down here. The reason I don't want to do it yet is just because if I don't have time, it's going to start sinking in and then I have to do it again. And like I said, I really want to keep the oiling out in the painting to a minimum. So yeah, with that, I think let's just get started with getting back into modeling and figuring more out the details of these lavender flowers.